The Fource recruiting conversation is among the most practically urgent episodes in this series. Every other episode, whether it's focused on the college to career gap, family dynamics around launch, or the mental health weight of uncertainty, circles back to the same question parents and students are actually asking. What does it take to get hired, and what are we getting wrong? Kim and Amy answer that question from a vantage point that almost no guest can match. They are not academics, not career coaches working with one student at a time, and not corporate HR communicating through official channels. They are the people in the room when a company decides whether your resume makes the cut, and they are the people on the phone when a candidate doesn't understand why it didn't work. This episode translates what happens behind that closed door. In the context of the dual track structure, this episode serves a bridging function. Parents will hear what their assumptions are costing their kids. Gen Z will hear, without the filter of parental anxiety or institutional politeness, what the people doing the actual hiring actually think. Have you ever faced a moment that changed everything? A loss, a new path, or an awakening that forced you to rewrite your life? Pivot Point is a podcast that explores those stories. I'm Nick Michael. We'll dive into how pain can spark growth and how crisis leads to clarity. Subscribe to Pivot Point today. Welcome to Pivot Point Strategy for Change. There is a version of the job search story that families tell themselves, and then there is what actually happens. The version families tell goes something like this: work hard, get the degree, build the resume, and the path forward will reveal itself. Do the right things in the right order, and the market will recognize the effort. It is a story built on a logic that made sense for a long time, and that is running into a reality that looks almost nothing like it anymore. What no one tells you, what most families don't find out until they're sitting at the kitchen table with a recent graduate who has been applying for months and hearing nothing back, is that the hiring process has changed in ways that are not obvious from the outside. The criteria have shifted. The signals that once worked no longer carry the same weight, and the assumptions that parents bring to the conversation, assumptions built from their own experience of launching into a workforce that no longer exists in that form, can sometimes make the situation harder rather than easier. Today's guests have a view of all of this that almost no one else does. They are not theorizing about the job market. They are inside it every single day on both sides of the table. Kim Steiner and Amy Krause are the partners behind Fource Recruiting, a firm they have built over more than 2 decades into one of the most trusted names in talent placement across ad tech, martech, digital media, and SaaS. What sets them apart is something their clients describe consistently and specifically. They don't play the numbers game. They don't flood a company with resumes and hope something lands. They take the time to understand what a company actually needs, what a candidate actually brings, and whether the fit is real before anyone's time gets spent on a conversation that was never going to go anywhere. Kim came up through magazine publishing and digital media sales, working at the executive level, reporting directly to CEOs, CTOs, and company presidents, before bringing that vantage point to the work of building and scaling teams. She understands what it looks like from the inside of an organization to need someone who can actually do the job, not just describe it convincingly in an interview. Amy spent more than 20 years in sales and sales management, leading teams across both startup and established companies before moving into recruiting. That background gives her something that most recruiters simply don't have. She's been the hiring manager. She knows what the role actually demands, which means she knows immediately when a candidate is prepared for it and when they're not. Together, they have placed candidates across some of the most competitive and hard-to-fit roles in the industry. And together, they have watched Gen Z enter the workforce in real time up close with no filter. What they are going to share today is not what you'd find in a career advice column. It is what they actually see, what is working, what is not, what candidates consistently get wrong about how they are being read, and what parents get wrong when they try to help. Thank you very much for joining us today. Welcome, Kim and Amy. I'm very excited to have this conversation. I'm looking forward to asking you a series of questions, as well as giving you an opportunity to share your experience and knowledge in your careers. But before we get into tactics, I want to start at the point where this usually breaks down. Families think they understand how hiring works, but you're both sitting inside the process every day, seeing what actually happens when candidates come through the door. My first question is, when you look at early candidates right now, especially recent grads, what is the biggest disconnect between what they think matters in getting hired and what actually determines whether they move forward?
Well, in my opinion, I think what oftentimes, and I can say this because I have a recent grad who just graduated 2 weeks ago.
Wonderful.
Living
Congratulations.
in my home, thank you. And just in speaking with her, but also speaking with her friends and classmates, I think what they think matters is in some ways the presence that you put out there all the time. They're very social media centric, and they're very much about building clout, or some, not all. I should definitely preface that. Some are very concerned about building the clout and sort of having that be their lead, and not necessarily, so having that speak for them, but not necessarily doing some of the fundamentals. I think what still matters is being prepared for your interviews, not relying on things like AI, really doing your homework, but also being comfortable with engaging with the person, the hiring manager or the recruiter that's contacting you. Because again, these are people who grew up at a time where social interaction wasn't as fluid as it was when you, Nick, Amy, and I all grew up. So it's that. And sometimes it's like, I don't want to take the next step to ask for the business or to ask the hiring manager, am I still being considered, because they're not as comfortable. But people really do need to take that, because people want to hire candidates that want to get hired, but also ones that have done a lot of the fundamentals, that homework, or those basics that I grew up with, and I no doubt I assume you grew up with as well. So I don't know your
Certainly.
thoughts, Amy.
Yeah, I would agree. I would think that a lot of folks coming out of college now think that they're just going to get the job, that the job is there. They're on it. They're cool. They're doing the work. They went to college. Everybody's hiring. So why won't you hire me? So I think that there's also sort of being thoughtful about what makes me different. Why does a company want to hire me? And again, kind of having to do the homework to be hired and to show who you are and show your personality. And also, I think they think it's a little bit easier than it has been kind of in the past to that point. It's not that it was easier, but it's a client's market. So therefore, you really do need to make yourself stand out. And I'm not sure they really realize that.
Yeah, no, very well said. I'm curious from both of you, when you're sitting across from a Gen Z candidate or on the other side of Zoom nowadays, what are you actually hoping to see? Not what the job description says, but what would make either of you put that resume up on the top of the pile? What do you see that you're saying, okay, this stands out? What is it? Is it a soft skill? Is it a major? Is it a university? What is it that separates someone?
So, and I think I heard you say it when I'm on Zoom. And so if you bring that into it,
Yeah.
that actually matters more than anything. So I think that no matter what, if I'm speaking to somebody, that I have spoken to somebody, recent graduate, and if they're sitting on their bed in their laptop, right, talking to me, I'm not sure that that's necessarily appropriate. So when you say, what are you looking for and what stands out, you're not going to have a lengthy resume at this stage. However, what you will have is who you are as a person, who you are as just being an adult and coming across and being articulate, being able to feel comfortable with talking about who you are, what you're looking for in a job, being able to describe what you graduated with. What did you study at school? Those things are important, I think, initially. And then when you talk about the actual resume itself and somebody's background, you can do a lot while you're at school. You can be proactive. Maybe you did an internship that was, in line with what you want to do in your career. So I think more than ever, it's being buttoned up, having a good personality, coming off as genuine, and have prepared. Have some things that you've done at school while you went to school, preparing you for the workforce.
And what I would add is that I don't want, especially on Zoom, now there oftentimes people have all their notes scripted out on another screen. And when I'm talking to someone, I can tell if someone is reading answers. Oftentimes that's something that, from my perspective, I want to be engaging with you. And if I feel that you're looking off or reading, that is something that for me is a red flag. Because it says that it's just a red flag. And I think that that's something that oftentimes people do because they're, again, they're not comfortable. They may not have all those stories, but that's definitely for me, the eye contact, that rapport, but not having everything scripted.
So I'm struck by what you said, because I was going to give this example later. And I have a colleague whose son finished in school and had been interviewing. He had some experience, but he was interviewing for positions and he kept not getting. And she finally recommended, call that person back, call the personal person back, and asked him, what kind of tips, what kind of pointers can you give me? What happened? What did I do? And the gentleman was very nice when he was trying to explain it to him. He goes, you came across very sincere. You were definitely nervous. Okay. You didn't look as motivated or animated, but that might be his flat affect. Okay. Because she told me he's got a flat affect. And then he said, you seem not as, when you asked questions to us, you were looking over to the left and you weren't keeping eye contact. And his mother told me, because he's got two screens and he was reading the question off the screen. And he said, everyone thought you were distracted. And, I'm wondering whether or not this young man fell trap to one of those stereotypes that most Gen Z people, and I was going to bring up some stereotypes to talk about, and it was one of the most valuable lessons, because then he was better prepared and he had his questions ready and he wasn't getting distracted and he was looking straight and forward. So that's just such a striking recommendation to bring up. So you see this a lot?
I don't personally see it as much as I see that from, frankly, more experienced people. And so it's not that I don't see it at all. And it could be somebody who gave a Gen Z person, right, the wrong advice in terms of preparing, because I see it less from them as I do. And I've seen it most recently in some candidates I've had out into the marketplace, because those are habits that I think come on. To me, it comes back to just be who you are, be genuine. Nobody's expecting you to have conquered the world. You're just graduating. And so I will stick with that advice, because I think that's what's going to attract a company to you.
Well said. I want to pull up on the screen just to get your feedback, since I have you both here. The skills employers most want. Employers expect nearly 40% of required workplace skills to change by 2030. Adaptability is becoming more important than static knowledge, according to World Economic Forum Future of Jobs Report 2025, fairly recent. The top 5 future skills: analytical thinking, resilience and adaptability, leadership, creative thinking. I have to scroll down. Lifelong learning. What this means for Gen Z: human skills remain critical even as AI expands. Adaptability is becoming more important than static knowledge. Skills that transfer across industries are the new currency. My question to you is, what skills are most valuable right now than any specific major or credential? I'll leave it on the screen.
Yeah, I can. It's funny that you brought this up, because I've experienced this again several times just in the last few days. And when I speak to my clients, and we've been trying to fill several roles recently with clients of ours, and what comes back often, and again, this is from Gen Z, you're just graduating or you've been in the workforce. It's those intangibles. It's these types of skills that I am hearing over and over again. We hear the term culture, but take it deeper to what you just said. So what I'm hearing, and what is, I think, extremely important, is being confident, but being humble. So it's also really important because I think people think they need to come in like, I'm your person. You got to hire me tomorrow. I'm the best thing since sliced bread, rather than, okay, I'm really confident, but I don't know everything. I'm seeing that skill set now more than ever being extremely critical. You know, people, you've always heard that questions say a lot about who you are. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I hear that that's an important skill set because that doesn't show that you're lacking in ability. It shows that you really have the ability because you're asking questions. So I think those types of skill sets are more important now than ever. How are you going to fit into the company? How are you going to get along with others? How do you work in a group setting? You don't need to be the smartest person in the room. That's not the kind of person that companies are looking to hire, in my opinion, and what I'm hearing more from my clients.
Yeah, and I would also say thinking about the business, thinking oftentimes when and this could be true for Gen Z or older people, but if you haven't thought about a client, if you're not always thinking of what can I do for you and how can I solve your problem, so confidence definitely goes, but it's I'm hiring you to help my business. So knowing how to move, business forward. And I think the idea of being analytical certainly is there because it doesn't mean you have to be, you know, competent from a mathematical standpoint. It means that you need to really sit and do and think about things. And then, as Amy said, fit. I mean, the culture, the fit issue is, oftentimes we hear they weren't a cultural fit, but it's would I want to sit next to this person as we're now more people are back in the office? Would I want to sit next to this person?
Yeah, and then finally, to kind of take off on what you're saying, is that we also hear a lot is be proactive, be organized, and those are some of those analytical pieces. And so you need to come to the table ready and excited and wanting to be there because I think oftentimes, and sometimes that could be. I've seen that more with the younger generation is, they're coming in. I'm not saying it's coming off as lazy, but come in there with I'm excited. I'm here. I'm proactive. I want to learn. I don't know everything, but I am organized and I am going to pay attention and I am going to be part of this team. And I think that's extremely important.
So I appreciate everything you've said. You're bringing up a lot of good points about all the intangible skills. And I'm also curious, how do we support parents who are trying to support their kids in choosing a major that will, in college, that will provide them with, a life, a salary, something, because we have a lot of kids who are looking for that dream job. Young people are visual learners as well as auditory, but primarily recently in the last 15 years, and I do think it's because just the devices that we use, the iPhone, the Chromebook, it just becomes, so what is the major? I mean, that's what we're looking at. Careers are becoming less linear. Skills and experiences are often matter more than the title of the degree. The first job is increasingly not the final destination. So we have a college major, the first job, they pivot again, they find a career. How should students think about choosing a major in today's economy, and how much does that choice actually matter? And I'm bringing this up as a parent, but parents are paying top dollar, as you know, and even if they're going to state or city here in New York, you're having a level of investment. And in today's economy, we can go there later, but what should students think about when choosing a major?
I mean, I can jump in because I myself had one of the least practical majors, which was art history. And oftentimes that's the one that's classically cited as the least practical one of the least. Philosophy is another one that you can have. And what I was fortunate to do, and this is where my parents are, my mom directed me, and the way I've sort of tried to direct my children is thinking about, I felt that I was really lucky that I got to do something I was passionate about. But I understood and where the support came as a parent was my parents, and as I've done with my children, have helped to try to inform the fact that regardless of what I did as a major, I really tried to get a solid resume before I graduated from college. Not everybody can. I was, again, just I worked at CBS as my first job because I got an internship there. But that was something that happened through my parent. I have one daughter who graduated in public health. She's now in digital media and marketing. So I don't know whether this is good or bad advice. I know a lot of parents who were parents of engineers who thought that or had seen that as the, one of the recession-proof careers because things are moving so quickly. Perhaps that's not, it's not what it used to be. But I would say going to college is a tremendous luxury. We know that. And not everybody has the ability to have their children sort of go and find themselves. But I also think that as a parent, you need to understand this is the last time that your child will have an opportunity to learn just for the sake of learning. And I do think that more and more companies are looking for well-rounded students. In tech, we'll use tech as an example. Oftentimes people who are in tech don't get hired because they may only be very sort of, tech centric and not people centric, and people hire people. So I personally don't know how to advise, my other daughter was a psych major. She's not doing anything with her major, but she is doing something with her minor, which is in music business. So anecdotally, I can look in my house and my life. So, don't use my opinion as gospel. But what I have seen is that at least the circle of friends that I have, no matter what their children are doing, they're doing because they're passionate, but they're also very focused when it comes to the next step in terms of helping build a resume before they even get out of college.
So well put. That brings me to another question. I want to bring something up. Passion versus aptitude. Employers are increasingly ranking analytical thinking, resilience, and adaptability above specific technical knowledge alone, as you just mentioned. So what the research shows, passion often follows competence, not the other way around. People frequently become interested in activities they become skilled at. Long-term success usually emerges where interests and abilities overlap. So here we have, right here in the center, sustainable career growth, what you're good at compared to what you love. What's the difference between passion and aptitude, and which should a young person lead with early in their career?
Amy?
Yeah, I would say, it can go either way. So what I mean by that is, I had a sister who her passion was to be a teacher. She was going to be a teacher when she was in 5th grade. My sister went on to be a teacher, and she went to college, graduated cum laude, and started her own school. So I think when we think of things like that, right, or we think about those people who have in them that they know they're going to be a doctor or a nurse, right, or or a lawyer, or those kinds of roles, not necessarily the kinds of things that we're talking about here today. And I think that is very specific, and that's where a passion is extremely important and very critical. And some young people have that figured out pretty early on. Then there's what Kim talked about, and I was similar. I did not graduate in advertising sales or where I ended up. However, what I did major in was sociology, was kind of criminal justice, people. So I ended up still leaning into who I was as a person and where the job took me to logically. So I think those are very evenly split between what is passionate, what's your aptitude. At the end of the day, to me, college in and of itself is just an experience, as we keep saying here. And so for most people, they don't know what that exact role is going to be when they get out. And so that's where those other softer skills, the human skills, the adaptability, the ability to end up doing something that you had no clue you were going to do.
No, I appreciate everything you're both saying. Yes. Now, because this is really what needs to get heard. And this is what I was driving at with wanting to focus on this for parents to hear both your personal and professional perspectives, and personal meaning your own or your children's, which is wonderful. There's a concept here, the career lily pad. New workforce research suggests many Gen Z workers are abandoning the traditional career ladder in favor of a more flexible career lily pad approach, according to the New York Post, 2025. What the research shows, career pivots are becoming more common and more accepted. Multiple career changes are increasingly normal. Adaptability may be a strength rather than evidence of confusion. So here we have the lily pad with the internship, the marketing, the startup, consulting, leadership, What do you say to a young adult who has changed direction 2 or 3 times and is starting to feel like something is wrong with them? Because on the other end of this is where parents would say, I think he needs to speak to someone.
I
And
think
that's where I would come in, or another clinician.
Yeah.
And how do we approach this? Go ahead. No,
Because I think it's really interesting because it comes back to, again, the words we use or the way we articulate, because there's trying different roles, trying to find what your interest is, but there's a journey. And when you do follow somebody's resume, there's a journey, and 9 times out of 10, they connect. One job to the next makes sense. One might only be a year or 2 years, and then you're moving to something else, but you can see some trends. There's a difference between that and trying to figure out where you're headed and what's right and wrong versus just job hopping or jumping from job to job. That's, to me, again, very small. Seems like a small difference, but a big difference in somebody's mindset. So I wouldn't say to somebody that's negative as you're trying to determine what you want to do, where you fit in, what is the best role for you. Something will click, but those other pieces of puzzle that we keep talking about should all be the same. Who you are, the effort you put in, the way you go after each one of these types of roles, events, jobs, whatever you want to call them. As long as you keep that same basis of who you are, that to me is not jumping or hopping or negative. That's finding yourself and growing.
And I would just add, from the clinical perspective, I think it is a family. And so it's something that I would look at as a family. So I shared with Amy, I was at an event yesterday, and the person, it was a founder of a health company, and he had the traditional resume of, Ivy League school, went into investment banking, had an opportunity to go join a taxi company in San Francisco in the early, 2010s. His mother said no, because you're at this, top bank. Had another opportunity, and he was miserable, had another opportunity to do something. And the parents were invested in the traditional side. Well, P.S., that taxi company became Uber. Maybe he should have gone, maybe not. But then as his third jump out of, the traditional, he then became a founder. But some of the reasons, and I bring this up, is you were saying the clinical side. Some of it is exploring the family dynamic, I think, perhaps from that side, because children are very much affected, I think, by the making sure that their parents feel happy too. And if they're in a job that they're supposed to do, perhaps that's why they are making those shifts, because it's not who they are. And they need to, in some way, set that foundation of, I did what I was supposed to do, and now I'm doing what I'm passionate about. And as people that want only the best for their kids and security, it's like, well, I don't know if you're going to eat if you become a founder, but that's what I want to do. It's at least that's what I've been seeing and hearing.
I appreciate hearing that. I'm glad you're bringing that up. There's a lot of conversation about what Gen Z expects from work. I want to get into that. The salary, the flexibility, remote options, and whether those expectations are realistic at an entry level. You're both in the room when that gap becomes visible. What actually happens? Is it a deal breaker, a negotiation, or something that's starting to shift on the employer side too? What's happening?
From the perspective of how it's set up, or
yeah, you have Gen Z coming in actually saying, yeah, they're concerned about work-life balance.
Right. I do think that it's interesting. I think that, as I think we can all agree, certainly COVID has a lot to do with that. I find that has become a big change in perspective of how Gen Z and just in general, people look at work. Right. So that's obviously a whole nother conversation about how we look at work. But from a perspective of having more flexibility and this work balance and whatnot, I think that in general, I do think that there's these belief that you can just sort of, this is what I want to do. I'm going to work from home. And if, I want this amount of money, and there you go. So if that's not going to happen, I'm not interested in the job. And there is no doubt I get a lot of that. And I get that throughout sort of age and amount of time that people have been in the workforce. But at the same time, I am starting to see a shift, sort of back to it's time. And it's not a bad thing, because I think we can all agree that we met a lot of great people that are probably still friends of ours. And so it's great personally as well. But it's companies do work better together when you're together in a work environment and you're collaborating. I do think, though, there is a shift, and that's good. Companies are finding this sort of hybrid term that we use. But if you prove yourself, it sort of all comes back to, it's not necessarily, depending on the company, that they're making you go in every day. I have a client who he's a leader in the organization, and he's a VP and has been remote for 2 to 3 years now, because he's proven himself and he can do the work and he does the job and he still can lead and manage. So I think if that sort of proves itself out, then we're finding more gray area and ways in which it works for both the company and the employee. But I do think, stepping into it for the first time, I have to admit that I think it's not necessarily the right perspective or persona that you want to put out there, leaning into the workforce for the first time, that you need work-life balance and need
Okay.
to work from home.
See, that is what I'm looking to highlight for many young people and their parents. Essentially, tips like that. The focus on how to present,
Right.
what to focus on, not to talk about the financial part of it too soon before you even get the job. Many are entering the interview, or even before, well, if I get it, it doesn't pay much. I don't know if I want it. And then the parent is like, well, it's very aligned with what you want to do. It's hard to find things, and they're looking, and they're a reputable company or something. So there are a lot of checks that are going, they're checking the boxes, but there's this perception, and I think that young people are doing, which it's a cognitive distortion. They're mind reading. They're anticipating, well, they're not going to want me, or they're going to want me and I'm not going to want them, or they're protecting themselves from rejection, from having to answer the difficult questions, and they're taking themselves out of the game before they get into the game, to get into the field. They're not even getting into the stadium. They're just, yeah, it's nice. That looks nice over there. But I'm not going to go for that and they make things up in their mind. So that's the cognitive distortion that I attempt to deal with young people, not just with CBT or acceptance and Gestalt, but we're trying to deal with some of that resistance, that self-sabotage, that what I call push-pull. You want, but you really don't want it. You're nervous. You're anxious. You don't want to deal with rejection. If they want me and I got to go through with this, and I don't really want it, but my mother is making me do this. My dad's pushing me. What am I supposed to do? We have anxiety.
Sure.
No, yeah. No, go ahead, Kim. I was noticing you.
No. I was just, first of all, I'm listening to everything you're saying. Thank you. And the other thing I was going to say, because I think Amy answered, the first part, but
Yeah.
it's speaking to what you're saying. I think that there's so much, not pressure, but so much of what is happening with Gen Z. I think from the the in office, no in office, it's a different, when you're looking at earlier Gen Zs versus later Gen Zs. So Gen Zs that are graduating now, yes, they were products of COVID, but they didn't graduate in COVID. So they may not have, yes, they'd like to work from home because perhaps it's more flexible, but they didn't have that as a model necessarily as students who graduated a little earlier. But what I'm seeing in terms of, I don't know, this job, some people are like, I don't want to be bored. And I think some of that is because they spend so much time, not on social media per se, but a lot of the media that they're consuming is about lives that are all fabulous. And it's about lives that, if I want something, I want it now and I can get it. And I feel because the accessibility is even more heightened than when than certainly when I came out 100 years ago, but even, people who came out, graduated 10 years ago, it's about trying to, I need to make sure I'm happy and I'm satisfied because so-and-so, look at so-and-so, they did that. They roll out of bed and everybody looks at their life and they're fabulous. And I think as parents, we understand that, or as that parents understand that there's a lot of fundamentals that go under that. And that's sort of where the tension lies, too. the friction between the two. That's all I was going to say, is that I think it's hard for them, because oftentimes not everybody is living this great life, but that's
Yes.
what you see and that's what you're attracted to.
I would agree with that, but and add to it that I think there is some enabling as well. And so I think that some parents have enabled and coddled a bit to say, oh, no, we have been through COVID, or and I get this is life, or my child has anxiety, and I get all of that. But I do believe that there is some enabling that can unfortunately come from the parents. And that I think there is some coddling a little bit, in that, again, times have changed. Let's take COVID out of it, but not what Kim's talking about, which I agree with wholeheartedly, in terms of the social media and more access to seeing, what they're missing or what they can have. But I feel like all of us, or I know when I was finished with school, we're going to help you, but you're going to have to figure it out, and you're going to get there. And we did. You figured it out, and you found a way. And I do think, unfortunately, I'm seeing more of these Gen Z now having a little bit more of that coddling and enabling, and therefore either they're saying, I have anxiety, or I'm not ready to, they're not getting kicked out. They're not getting kicked out of the house as quickly. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but I feel like we're definitely in that place right now. And I think there's a variety of things that make that happen, and why we're in that place.
I appreciate hearing that. And this is what I'm hoping. This is targeting parents who are going to target for their children. And then that conversation will continue with the young adults as I take the next step in this whole series. So this is very important for parents to hear how they're coddling them. You're listening to Pivot Point, Strategy for Change. I'm Nick Michael. If today's conversation resonated with you, please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. It truly helps others find the show and supports the work we're doing here. I want to present a framework that I think has an impact right now on what's happening with young people when they're getting hired. And I think there's a disconnect between those who are employers right now who are not Gen Z. They're not necessarily millennial either. They might be like us, X or boomers. So I'm going to pull it up. This is from David Yeager's book, and talking about the leadership gap, what Gen Z is teaching us about motivation, meaning, and the future of work. And he really goes right to it. This is the complaint that we hear from employers. They're not resilient. They don't stay. They expect too much. They want pay. They want rapid advancement. Parents are saying that they're anxious. They're overwhelmed. They're afraid to fail. Educators are saying they're disengaged. The research says we're asking, based on what he's saying, in short, we're asking the wrong question. We shouldn't be asking what's wrong with Gen Z. The right question is, how does motivation actually work between the ages of 10 and 25? What are we doing? Young people are becoming more motivated when they feel respected, capable, and connected to meaningful goals. So do I matter? These are the hidden needs that you tell me. I want your reaction to this. These are the hidden needs that young people are having right now. They're extraordinarily attuned to respect, not flattery, not empty praise, genuine respect, the kind that communicates, I see you as capable and your perspective matters. Do I matter? Am I respected? And do my contributions count? At the workplace, he's finding when Gen Z leaves a job after 6 months, are they rejecting work itself, or are they rejecting environments where they don't feel valued, developed, or connected to a larger purpose? Entitlement is the issue from the leader's point of view. They lack commitment. They want more for less. The research suggests they're responding to disrespect. They see no development pathway. They feel disconnected from the purpose. They're big on purpose. Am I growing? Am I learning? Is someone investing in me? So this is the shift here. This is really where I'm trying to notice the difference. There's a management model. Do what I tell you to do. When you're done, come back. Let me show you. You need to do this, that, and the other thing. Come back when you're done. It could be even as cut and dry. The mentor mindset. Managing asks us, how do I get the person to perform? Developing asks, how can I help this person become more capable tomorrow than they are today? The focus is on the person, their growth, and their long-term trajectory. What most leaders think is more authority, more control, more accountability systems. Yeager is talking about the research and how high standards, high belief, mentoring over management. So he's talking about what's the difference between managing someone and developing them. And at first glance, the two seem familiar. Both involve supervising, expectations, results, underlying goals. But managing someone, and I just want to mention this. I mean, I learned years ago, we manage things and we lead people. I don't know if that's just, how I was brought up. And my background, my undergrad was in business. It was in marketing and management. I worked for airline. I'm saying this, Amy's not familiar. I worked in airline sales for years before I went into the, and started my graduate program in clinical social work. Then had an opportunity after sending out resumes, getting a call from that one airline that says, hey, we need a sales guy. Great. That's me. And where are you now? Well, I'm back in reservations. Okay, well, come on in, because I was still in the field, but I was part-time. I was going to school and part-time. And I said, great, I'll take it. So I took the year off from my graduate program. And then midway through, I will say, I didn't like being yelled at by a manager that wasn't my own manager. And I just sucked it up. I was embarrassed and humiliated and demeaned in front of a whole reservations department. It was a small department, maybe 30, 40 people. It wasn't like Pan Am's department, which was hundreds. Even in the Pan Am building, it was hundreds. So I stayed quiet. I went back, didn't even tell my manager. I took a week. I told my manager, and then I gave my month's notice. And it was at that moment, this is what inspired me to run and to do this work that I do now, focusing on the pivot point that changed someone's life. My decision was made, and then I called Fordham and said, let's talk about internships, because I couldn't do them before, but now I don't have work, so now I could do it. So I can go back now. I took the year off, had enough money to go back and now do an internship unpaid. These are internships that are not paid. And then change my career. And I haven't looked back. And that was 1993. I finished in 94. So it's many years later with a big, big pivot. But that quiet quitting that I hear, I kind of connect to that. When the union was on strike, we would unplug our phones and go downstairs and stand in front of we had to pace in front of the building and then go back upstairs. Then we had to do a slow down. I never knew what a slow down was. And that meant you stay on the phone call longer. One moment, please. You press pause. You come back. Yes, I'll get that for you. And then just come back and milk the call. So what does that do? It just builds up this long waiting list for people to get on to the phones. Pan Am was flushing out the mainstream workers and bringing in B-scale workers. I worked part-time at Pan Am when I was there the first year, and I was a B-scale worker. They were trying to bounce out the unions. They were promoting supervisors who had been there for over 30 years, who deserved to be promoted, making them management, and then accessing them after 6 months, probably a year later, because they were cutting back. So they would lose their seniority. They would lose their pensions to a degree, right? So there was a slow, shortly after, I got there shortly after the Pan Am Flight 103, as you know, over Lockerbie. So this was slowly happening, and no one expected the flagship carrier of the United States to go down, by no means, just like they didn't expect Lehman Brothers or the rest. Okay. So noticing the market, and if you talk about the first Gulf War, and we're in a different war now, but it was pretty gloomy. There was a recession in 91, and then all this was happening. Didn't look promising, the business field. And I wanted more control for myself of the work that I do and my future, and realized I'm making a pivot. Always wanted psychology when I was in the 10th grade, but never did it. When I got to PACE, it made more sense to do business. It just made more sense. I was connected to it, both into the marketing and the management sales aspect of it. So it was a great, great experience, but there was a pivot. So we have a lot of people nowadays making those pivots. Getting back to this, managing someone is much different than developing the person. So the manager will say, how do I get this person to perform today? Assigning work, monitoring progress, correcting mistakes, measuring productivity, enforcing standards. The developing of someone's progress, the person, how can I help this person become more capable tomorrow than they are today? Coaching rather than directing, providing learning opportunities, giving them meaningful feedback, assigning assignments, helping people reflect on their success and their failures. So the management response is, you missed the deadline. I need you to be more careful next time. Goal is to correct. Employee learns what went wrong. Do you see that with managers? Am I on the right track with that pretty much? Are we looking at that happening with managers requesting that? When you're developing someone, you missed a deadline. Let's talk about what happened. What did you learn? What did you do differently next time? What support would have helped you to succeed? The mistakes become part of the developmental progress. But the biggest question comes back to, Yeager's research talks about management cultures rely on compliance and hierarchy are producing disengagement, not performance. And if we look at schools, they're trying to motivate They're trying to use a model that will motivate. In communities where there are systems built for compliance rather than connection or failing the entire generation at a critical developmental window. What I'm noticing, though, in school, where in the schools now, it's more of a mentor type ish. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Let's have a growth mindset. Let's learn from this experience. You're not going to be perfect. And let's go over what you did wrong so we can train you and teach you. And almost that pat on the back. So I'm wondering whether or not young people are entering an environment where there's a management focus and things are changing rapidly because they're entering the environment more skilled and more aware and better technology, with understanding more of what's going on in the world and what maybe the job might involve, not fully trained, but having more proficiency. And then they're being spoken to in a way, and then they're getting complained about because they are not resilient enough, or you can't raise your voice, or you can't make references to certain things, and they may be overreacting. That's my question. Do you see that? The management versus the mentor type of impact.
The
that it's having?
misalignment.
Yes, the misalignment. Yeah.
The misalignment. And in my opinion, some of it depends on how old a manager is and the kind of there's I think a few things that come into play. A, the age of the manager. B, the sort of culture, and it comes back to the culture of the
Come
company.
back to the culture. Yes, good.
And then C, sort of what expectations are set up. So what I'm seeing is that, and I think also, and B, what the role is. In sales, people have always said you live and die by your numbers, right? And there's always been
Bottom
that
line.
if you can do whatever, if you're hitting your numbers, there's a lot that you can do or not do or whatever. But
Flexibility
if
and
you're
the leash.
right,
Yeah, along the leash.
hitting your numbers, exactly. So that's, I'll take sales off the table. But what I've seen at least is that as more and more sort of millennial Gen Z managers are coming in, they are tending to, I guess, mentor more than traditionally manage, but where I think, again, the friction is still in remote situations because it's hard to sometimes know to form those rapports or the rapport where you can know and mentor in the same way over a screen, the way you would, having someone come in and sit in their office. And as a result, because some people are living in echo chambers because you only have your screen, there, they may be hearing what I see as perhaps correct supportive criticism as, oh my goodness, they yelled at me, and it's only because they don't have that sort of environment or peer-to-peer opportunity to sort of sit and learn. And we've all well, I shouldn't say everybody, people
That's a
have
good
pride in
point.
their office, male or female.
Yes, no, that
but you don't have
peer-to-peer
that.
next to you opportunity to be, yes, good. I agree, yes.
I would say that we've evolved in a positive way. I think that some of what you were speaking of, again, I'm going back to the gray area side of it. I think that it's absolutely evolved, or I do think that I'm hearing less and less about the awful manager that I have that is yelling at me or, not treating me with respect. Because the reason I say that is in many of the roles, I'm going to come back to what we do, which is recruiting, and the clients in which we work with and the people that I'm speaking with that are leaders in the organizations that we're working with, right? So some can be larger, some are smaller, and it's somebody who's running a department. But what I hear from them is more like, we want to hire people. The skills that they're focusing on are more of what we talked about earlier in our conversation. It is more about the softer skills, right? So they can click off everything on the resume, but to me, it's encouraging to hear from the leaders that I'm speaking to that I want somebody who's going to have their own opinion. I don't want to hire somebody who's just going to sit in this corner and I give them this one thing that they need to do, and that's their job. So I do feel like it's never going to be perfect, and it's always going to come back to who we are as humans. And some leaders just shouldn't be leaders. They might be really good at what they do, but the mentoring and the people skill is not theirs. I'm just being honest with what I hear you saying. I'm personally, the shift to me is I'm feeling in a positive way and not as, I don't hear as much, oh my gosh, this guy was off the charts, or this woman, nobody could work for, I'm not hearing it as often.
I hear you.
But it's there. There's no doubt that it's there. And I think that it's still, though, as a Gen Z coming into the marketplace now, some of those, and it's hard because when it's your first job or second job, first job most of the time is how do I pick that up? How do I pick that nuance up? And those could be some of the questions that they really need to ask that hiring manager. What's important to you? What's critical? That's what they should have. What are those questions that would set me off to know, boy, that this guy's going to be tough, right? If
Yes.
anything, that's where I lead. I just don't see it as black and white.
So, Nick, I have to leave. Please continue your conversation with
No,
Amy.
thank you. Yeah, no.
Thanks so much for including me in this.
Yes. So, Amy, I was going to ask you,
Yes.
since remote work has changed the map for everyone, but it may have changed it most for the people who are just starting out, what does early career development actually lose when it happens online, on screen, instead of in person in the room? And is that something Gen Z is aware of, or is it a cost that they're not fully accounting for yet?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot is lost. I think, it's interesting, right? The theme of our conversation has been so much about how do we feel, How
Yeah.
do we feel as a Gen Z? How am I being treated? How am I being spoken to? All of these human pieces. And those that, again, I come back to my clients now. They're not just looking at a resume and checking off, this is the job responsibility and this is the function of the job. They want more of that cohesiveness and working together, working with each other. Hence why I think the culture of bringing people back to the office. But to answer your question specifically, I think coming on as a Gen Z, as your first job, as a remote job, this is going to sound crazy. I don't know that I would do that. I honestly don't know that I would recommend it.
So I appreciate hearing that 100%. I want to tell you, the high school kids I work with,
Yeah.
they're telling me I want a job where I can work online. I want to work from home. What do you want to do? Well, they're entrepreneurial, these young men, and they're going to make shirts and they're going to sell the shirts and they're going to make items and they're going to market them. And they have some concrete, probably realistic ideas. Their priority is working online.
Right.
I'm not changing their perception of reality. I'm not talking them out of it. I'm not even, it depends on what they need exactly. But when you're trying to find someone's passion, and if we talked earlier about passion or aptitude, right? I find kids tend to gravitate to what they're proficient at, what they're good at. And if it's a subject that would reflect what their life work could be, they will gravitate to that subject. Earlier, I had a conversation with a leadership coach. And she was clear in saying math was not my subject. So that was not where I was going. She became a journalist. So my point is, when they realize they're not going to be a baseball, a soccer, or hockey, or football player, or anything in the arts as far as a musician, or if it's not working in that, or acting, but sometimes they'll just go for those majors anyway, and then they won't know what to do afterwards. So they're following their heart and choosing a major. And that's the hard part. Where do they go with that? With parents who have conflicting ideas about what's going to work for them. Because, and I think this is what I wanted to ask you. Do you see a safety net, what I call the safety net, of parents protecting their kids, which I can understand that. And I'm not talking about from the dangers out there. We understand that. I'm talking about allowing them to go for their dreams and then regretting their college choices because of the expense and not getting work, or not being able to focus themselves because they're so busy going for their sports or their music or their acting or their careers. Do you notice that with parents as far as protecting kids? You said coddling earlier. I'm not sure if that falls into that category.
Yeah, and I don't mean it because I want to be careful with my words from either coddling, enabling, because I don't want that to sound negative. But my answer is yes, and I feel that there are parents now and people who we know that are parents with Gen Z kids that they are and can afford to. I think it comes back to what you can afford, obviously. And if they can afford to allow them that latitude to figure it out and not quite sure what they're going to do and still live at home, I'm seeing a lot of that.
And how does that work out generally, given what you know? How do you define that success for them?
And I'm not seeing, this is, again, I don't see it helping.
Okay.
And that's the truth. I see that they're not getting anywhere. And then every once in a while, the parents are complaining, oh, Susie's still home. I wish she'd get going, but then they're not doing anything to make Susie feel like I better get going.
So they're not igniting them, a
No,
fire under them.
they're
Right.
not putting a
Okay.
fire. And because I think there's this cautiousness, or it comes back to sometimes I hear, well, I got to be careful. Susie really has anxiety. And I'm
Yes.
not
Okay.
saying Susie doesn't, but Susie's not, and everyone's in therapy, as we know now. How many Gen Z? I
Yeah.
mean, everybody's in. So is this a crutch? And again, I am not trying to say it's not real, but what are the differences? That same words I'm using, is that a crutch? Is that enabling? Is that coddling? These words I throw out because I don't know really, and each situation I think is very different.
It is. This is what's driving me to continue on this type of
Yeah.
series. I want to present a question to you, and I like bringing things up so people can read it. If you can give Gen Z one piece of advice to actually succeed in today's system without losing who they are in the process, what would it be? And I'll leave it on the screen.
Yeah, I would say that be really thoughtful about what you want to do. In other words, it might not be what you majored in. It might be what you majored in college. But if you want to succeed, be true to yourself, be honest, be transparent. Don't put up a fake who you are because you think you should, or somebody told you to act a certain way or be a certain way. And also just make sure that you stay focused, because no matter what, nothing's going to come easily. And so I think that, and that I do appreciate. It's a little more difficult. It's a little more competitive. Everybody's, a lot more people are trying to get the job you want. So you have to be on your game. You have to be organized. You have to be willing to put in the effort, but don't lose who you are. And be
So stay
honest
true to
with
yourself. Yes.
And stay
Good.
true to yourself.
There's an entire industry now built around personal branding for job seekers, like LinkedIn optimization, content strategy, building a professional presence online. How much of that actually moves the needle from where you're sitting? And is there a version of it that's helping candidates versus a version that's actively working against them?
Yes, that's
Okay.
a great question.
Tell me what you think. I wanted to hear
LinkedIn-
from you.
Yeah, LinkedIn now more than ever is a critical application. Yes, LinkedIn is extremely important. And I say that specifically if you're going to be in the workforce as we know it, right? That type of job. So right out of college, I tell college students this, I've worked with them. You need to have a LinkedIn profile and presence. It's extremely important. At the same time, it can hurt you or help you, as you mentioned.
Yes, yeah.
And that comes back to doing the work. You might say to yourself, well, I don't have a lot to put in my profile, but you do. Your internships, if you've hopefully, I don't care if it was a summer job, or my hope is that if you're looking for a job, and that comes back to what we were discussing earlier, that it will be in line with what your major was. So no matter what that is, you need to put a profile on LinkedIn. You also need to be thoughtful. You're not going to have a lot of jobs in there, and you might not have a lot of history, but those little pieces like the about section, be able to very quickly, with not too many paragraphs, articulate what you are looking for. And then underneath your name, put a title or what you're looking for. The reason I tell you this is because now the algorithms are really kicking into gear. And for somebody like ourselves here at Fource Recruiting, we have LinkedIn Recruiter. And LinkedIn Recruiter is a different product than LinkedIn, as we all know. So in myself as a recruiter or a company directly is searching to make hires, those words that you put into your LinkedIn profile come into play. Those LinkedIn words or keywords that you put into your profile come into play for a recruiter and or a company who is searching to make a hire. And we're using LinkedIn Recruiter. It is used to find candidates. So it's critical.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Fource Recruiting and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, one of the things that makes Fource Recruiting, I think, unique and really helpful is that what we are doing is we're working with companies that are having difficulty making some critical hires. So it could, and by the way, these hires could be very senior people, or frankly, it is somebody who might be right out of college. It can be sales, it could be product marketing, customer success, but they might be looking for somebody who's just got a great passion or attitude or hardworking. I get that a lot. So what we're doing is we're working really hard with our clients to find candidates that fit the need and the requirements for their company. And what makes us unique is we all come from the industry. So it's different. And what we're doing is we put the human touch on it and we spend the time. And what makes us different at Fource Recruiting is we're not just blasting the marketplace and grabbing resumes and sending them off to a client. We're spending the time and we're speaking to people and we're helping them. And oftentimes I find myself doing that, helping them decide, is it the right path? Is this the right job for them? And so that's what we do. And then we're matchmakers and obviously, hopefully make some good connections. And
Of course, no, very well said. AI has made it easier than ever to produce a polished resume, a strong cover letter, and a prepared interview answer. But you're on the other side of that. Can you tell us when it's been used and when it works against a candidate? When does the polish become a problem?
again,
Can you tell it's being used is what I'm asking. Yeah.
yes, what a great question. And I have to be honest with you, and it just happened again recently with some of our
How does that impact?
candidates. It's negative.
Yeah. Okay.
Companies can tell. So the AI should be used to fine tune. Again, the theme of the conversations that we're having here come into play. I want to know who you are on that piece of paper. I don't want to see something that has been written and it is very clear when it's not real and it's sadly been fine tuned by AI. It's not representative of you, and companies can pick that up. So it's not helping in any manner at all. It really isn't for either. I will also add this. It doesn't help a lot when you're planning for an interview. In other words, take a look at it, maybe get some insights on the type of questions to ask. But again, back to the example I think you gave earlier, it's very apparent when somebody's asking, especially Gen Z, to ask some questions like, where'd that come from? The value is not helping. It's sad because it's going too far. It's an extreme and clients are very frustrated with it. Again, the reason why folks like us come into play, because we've done the work and we're screening and we're talking to people. The resumes we're getting, we'll know and, send them back if they're not appropriate.
Right. Good. Well said. I'm glad you said that. Before we wrap up, I want to open the opportunity for you to provide anything that you'd like to say right now in relation to our conversation. What else would you like to add?
Yeah, that's really great. I think I'm really excited that you're having these kinds of conversations because what I've seen and what I'm getting out of speaking to you here and spending the time is in some ways we've evolved and in some ways we're still the same. And unfortunately or fortunately, the technology can be helpful, but it can also hurt us because it loses that human connection. And at the end of the day, whether you're a Gen Z or you're an older person looking for a job, you need to make that human connection. And you can't be lazy. You need to go through the process. You need to do the work. AI is not going to do the work for you and get you the job. And so I think that it's really important that we remember that and don't forget the human touch.
So well said, Amy. I have to thank you.
Thank you.
Kim, Amy, thank you for joining us here. Before we wrap up, I want to say something, and I mean it genuinely.
Okay.
What you both have built and the way you've built it is not common. You're not in the business of just moving paper. You're in the business of getting it right. And in an industry where the temptation to play the numbers game is everywhere, you've spent more than 2 decades running on the principle that fit matters more than speed. That says something about who you are, not just what you've built. And more than that, the candor you brought to this conversation is the kind that most people in your position don't offer publicly. You didn't soften the edges. You didn't hedge for the sake of being polite. You told people what they actually need to hear about how they're being seen. And that is exactly how this show exists to do. Thank you genuinely for your time. for your honesty, and for a conversation that I know is going to land for a lot of families who needed to hear exactly this.
Thanks so much for including me in this.
Yeah, thank you, Kim, for joining us.
Of course.
Thank you very much for speaking on Pivot Point Strategy for Change.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
I really appreciate it. What a pleasure meeting you. Thank you.
It's
for
really
taking
great
the
to
time.
meet you, and I'm glad we've made this connection too. Thank you very much for joining us today. Pivot Point Strategy for Change.